From the heart of Africa, Burkina Faso shines anew.
The Africa spoke. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African stories.
$190 billion. That's how much post-harvest value Africa has started keeping for itself, without loans, without the IMF, and without foreign aid. That number isn't a fantasy. It's not even a forecast. It's what's already happened quietly off the radar of most global headlines. But here's the part no one expected. It started with one man in a bamboo shed pressing oil from cashews by hand. No investors, no consultants. No Harvard pitch deck, just a quiet refusal to sell raw materials at a discount and buy them back packaged at a premium. And the moment he succeeded, the system moved, quietly, relentlessly, shipments delayed, microloans frozen. International permits rechecked with invisible standards. No press conferences. No official bans, just the quiet pressure of a structure afraid of losing control. So before we go deeper, pause here for a second. If you've ever wondered why change feels impossible, or why doing the right thing somehow triggers the wrong consequences, drop a single dot in the comments, just one, because maybe that's how every rebellion starts. And hit subscribe, because stories like this aren't designed to go viral. They're designed to be buried. This is the story of how a man named Traoré disrupted the entire logistics chain of global trade. Not by fighting it, but by making it irrelevant. $190 billion. That's how much value Africa has started keeping inside the continent since 2018. Not through aid, not through charity, but through post-harvest processing done entirely by Africans themselves. This isn't a headline you'll find on CNN or Bloomberg, but it's happening quietly, relentlessly. And it began with a man no one expected. Traoré wasn't a reformer, he was a farmer, no foreign degrees, no NGO profile. Just a small cashew field in Burkina Faso and a question no one else seemed to ask. Why are we still exporting the same way we were colonized, raw and powerless? Instead of selling raw nuts at bottom prices, he built a small bamboo shed, pressed oil by hand, packaged it in recycled glass and labeled it locally. No foreign partner, no certification from Brussels. Just a clean product processed in the same village it was harvested. When his first container left port for Marseille, it didn't make global news, but it sent quiet shockwaves through European logistics networks. Inside, cashew oil, moringa powder, roasted cocoa, and dried mango, all packaged to international standard with traceability without a single intermediary. No one had ever done that before. Not from West Africa, not without approval. And that's when the silence started to get loud. Not a ban, not a press release, but port delays, loan freezes, sudden inspections for soil content and microbial residue. No one said it directly, but the message was clear. You're not supposed to know how to do this. So here's the question. What happens when a farmer stops asking permission to grow? What happens when a continent begins to realize that the real money isn't in the field, but in the factory next to it? Before Traoré, cashew farmers were selling raw for $0.20 per kilo. After processing locally, that same kilo sold at $4, $50, a 2,150% increase in retained value. That's not just economics, that's freedom. And maybe that's why none of the top global financial institutions covered it, because this wasn't a success story you could take credit for. It was a model you couldn't control. But what stunned the system most wasn't that it worked, it's that he did it without asking. And this tiny bamboo factory in Burkina Faso is where everything changed. But here's what no one saw coming. The real disruption wasn't loud. It didn't come with banners or speeches. It came from something so small, so quiet, most people stepped right over it, until it moved. The factory didn't even have a front gate. Just 4 bamboo walls, a tin roof, and a solar battery held together by rusted bolts. But from that space came the first processed African agricultural product to cross the Atlantic without a European label. Not a prototype, not a case study. A real shipment, real value, real fear from those who never saw it coming. Traoré started with nothing but a borrowed rice cooker, some repurposed glass jars, and a handful of farmers who didn't even believe him at first. He taught himself how to cold-press cashew oil by watching videos at a cybercafe. His first labels were printed on leftover paper from a school supply store. Before the factory, these farmers were making $100 a month at best. Within 18 months, some were earning more than government officials. And yet no one wrote about it. No NGO celebrated it. No foreign investor touched it. Why? Because it wasn't part of the script. There was no pitch deck. No feasibility study. No multilateral funding to showcase. It was just one question turned into action. What if we stop exporting dreams and start exporting finished goods? The first batch cashew oil, cocoa powder, and sun-dried mango met every international food standard. Organic, traceable, no preservatives, and it sold out before it even cleared customs. But here's the part most people miss. He didn't just sell products, he rewrote the flow of power. Because when you control the process, you control the price. And when you control the price, you control the future. Now ask yourself this. How many other small farms around the world have been told you're not big enough to matter? How many dreams are rotting at the border because someone decided the label mattered more than the labor? If this part of the story made you stop and feel something, drop one sentence in the comments. Not for the algorithm, for the people still working in the shadows. Because what happened next didn't come from a boardroom, it came from an empty port. And a container that wasn't supposed to pass inspection, but did. And once it left the dock, there was no turning back. No one in Marseille knew what was inside the container. It didn't come through a familiar route. It didn't have a European partner. And it didn't match any known export model from West Africa. But when the seal broke open at Port 56, the surprise wasn't the product, it was the presentation. Sealed glass bottles of golden cashew oil. Vacuum-packed cocoa with traceable origin codes. Labels in French, Japanese, and English. Every unit barcoded, shelf-ready. This wasn't aid, this wasn't a pilot project. This was a market entry uninvited. The French logistics supervisor, according to leaked correspondence, flagged the shipment internally. Not because it failed inspection, but because no one could explain how it got this far without external approval. The next morning, 3 European agricultural trade groups requested clarification. By that afternoon, a short internal memo circulated in Brussels. It had just one highlighted sentence. This is a development path outside the existing system. Before that shipment, Africa was a supplier of raw goods. After it, someone had to ask, what if it became a brand? In Burkina Faso, Traoré didn't even know the reaction had started. He was back on the farm, calibrating a freeze-drying chamber built from salvaged parts. A local journalist showed him the news clipping. He didn't smile, he just said, "If they have to ask questions, maybe it means we answered one." But in Geneva, Washington, and Rotterdam, the tone wasn't curious. It was concerned. Suddenly, microloans for farms near Traoré's factory were put under review. Customs documentation began taking weeks, not days. EU development agencies quietly removed references to Burkina Faso from select program listings. No official reason given, no legal basis required. It wasn't a punishment. It was pressure measured, plausible, deniable, and that's how soft systems protect hard interests. Because the real threat isn't what you grow. It's what you dare to keep. And this is where the game begins to shift. Because if one container made it through, who else might try? The bans never came, but the doors started closing. Slowly, quietly, one handle at a time. After the Marseille shipment, Traoré's factory didn't get raided. It got ignored strategically. 3 small cooperatives that supplied him were suddenly cut off from international microfinance. Not denied, just moved to pending. A solar-powered drying plant was flagged for possible irregular construction materials. All the export certifications that used to take 10 days now took 45, no official letter, no press coverage, just enough slowness to kill momentum. It wasn't war, it was drag, the kind that makes you doubt yourself. That whispers maybe you weren't ready. That tells your partners maybe he's too risky. One morning, a group of students from Ghana arrived at Traoré's farm. They had traveled 2 days by bus to see the bamboo factory they'd heard about on WhatsApp. But when they got there, half the machines were shut down. The bank account tied to his business had been temporarily frozen pending audit. The workers were still present, but now clining, waiting, watching. What do we tell them? His niece asked, holding her notebook. Tell them this is what innovation looks like when it's not approved, he said. A few days later, an invitation to an agricultural trade fair in Kigali was rescinded due to incomplete documentation. The same documents he had submitted last year, unchanged, were now flagged. And yet Traoré didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post a rant. He didn't ask for justice. He opened a classroom, 20 chairs, one projector. He began teaching young people how to press, pack, label, and track their own goods without waiting for someone else's blueprint. Because he knew the real power wasn't in breaking the rules. It was in teaching others that the rules were optional. But here's the thing no one anticipated. The quieter he got, the louder the model became. In markets, in side conversations, on message boards. And someone was about to notice, not to celebrate it, but to stop it. He never advertised it, but it showed up anyway, in coffee shops in Nairobi, in cocoa farms in Ghana, in WhatsApp groups in Lagos. Traoré's blueprint wasn't emailed, it was whispered. Process it here, label it here. I'll ship it directly. 3 steps, but for Africa's economy, it was a revolution. By the time the systems tried to shut it down, it was already growing legs in 9 other countries. A youth collective in Kenya started freeze-drying sweet potatoes using solar power. A cashew co-op in Côte d'Ivoire stopped exporting raw nuts and launched its own snack brand. In Senegal, a local mayor quietly mandated that school lunches include only locally processed foods. And none of them asked for permission. They asked for training. So they got on buses, on bikes, on foot, headed toward a bamboo factory in Burkina Faso. Some found Traoré, others just found the lesson he left behind. Don't wait for the gate to open, build your own damn door. Before, these countries exported dreams and imported instructions. Now they're exporting value and importing pride. And suddenly, EU trade officials were no longer just watching. They were updating reports, quietly flagging this shift as a potential destabilizer of regional value chains. A French analyst put it more bluntly in a leaked memo. If they process and keep the margin, our leverage declines. That memo never made it to the news. But in markets across West Africa, local shelves that once held imported pasta now carried locally packaged cassava. Moringa tea from Togo, dried okra from Ghana, groundnut butter from Benin, labeled clean, sealed tight, tracked and traceable, not just made in Africa, but kept in Africa. Now here's the question no one wants to ask. What if they no longer need the systems designed to help them? What happens when young people choose a production line over a visa line? If this hits something in you, subscribe or send this to someone who still believes Africa only makes raw goods. Because the next part of this story, it's what happens when old systems try to put the lid back on something that's already boiling over. It didn't come with tanks, it came with terms, carbon compliance, labor traceability, soil origin. One by one, new technical barriers started appearing, not to improve quality but to narrow the gate. EU agencies announced updated sustainability guidelines that would apply to all exporters technically. But in practice, Local African processors were suddenly held to higher standards than European industrial farms. A shipment of moringa powder from Togo was flagged for possible microbial inconsistencies. Cashew snacks from Burkina Faso were delayed over insufficient carbon tracking data. Meanwhile, European goods continued flowing freely, with no new forms, no new fees. The message was simple: we don't need to stop you if we can exhaust you. Traoré saw it coming. He told his students in a night class, when you change the rules without saying why, that's not regulation, that's reaction. And the reaction kept growing. A West African cocoa cooperative was removed from a European funding directory overnight, no explanation. NGO-backed trade fairs began excluding brands that couldn't verify their organizational transparency, a vague requirement newly added this year. And perhaps most revealing, a Belgian diplomat was caught on a hot mic saying, "If they process, sell, and keep their profits, where exactly do we fit in?" It wasn't a leak, it was a slip, but it said everything. And as regulations tightened, media coverage shifted. Suddenly, articles appeared questioning the safety of Africa-made food. One French op-ed asked if local production was undermining global safety standards. Another German piece floated the idea that over-localization might create instability. They weren't talking about bacteria, they were talking about autonomy, and autonomy makes people nervous, especially when it doesn't look like it needs saving. Traoré, meanwhile, kept his old habits, still wore the same brown shirt, still drove the same pickup, but he'd stopped attending conferences. He said, "You don't get invited to the table when you've started building your own kitchen." And quietly, behind all the noise, a new kind of silence began to spread. Not the silence of retreat, the silence of roots pushing deeper. Traoré's name began to vanish, one listing at a time, removed from conference rosters, deleted from NGO databases, left off funding records where his model had once been highlighted as innovative. No ban, just erasure. But something strange happened. His ideas didn't vanish. They multiplied. A young woman in Senegal started her own peanut oil brand, citing Traoré's freeze-drying model. A group of students in Rwanda opened a co-op using his original labeling format. In Accra, a startup copied his barcoding method down to the font, and none of them needed his permission, because he never built a franchise. He built a language, one that said, start where you are, process what you grow, keep what you earn. By the time his last container was quietly rejected on grounds of unspecified microbial irregularities, he had already trained dozens of young entrepreneurs. And they weren't looking for headlines. They were looking for continuity. The final blueprint wasn't on a website, it was on classroom walls, not as a product flow but as a principle: no raw exports, no dependency, no waiting. And while some policymakers still scramble to contain the ripple effect, a quiet revolution keeps moving forward, without flags, without slogans. In Kampala, supermarket shelves now carry homegrown-only aisles. In southern Mali, 2 women launched a direct-to-diaspora dried fruit brand, bypassing all middlemen. In northern Nigeria, a pastor opened a soap factory using local shea butter and Traoré's old cold-pressing guide. He wasn't copied, he was carried, and maybe that's what worried the system most, that his name didn't need to survive because his method already had. So when you see a Made in Africa label without a Western tag, maybe you're not looking at a product. Maybe you're looking at the ghost of a man who taught people not to knock, just walk through the wall. Traoré didn't become a hero, he became a rumor, the kind of rumor that doesn't fade but roots. And maybe that's the most dangerous kind, because what he built wasn't loud, wasn't rich, wasn't shiny, it was repeatable. And in a world that profits off gatekeeping, something repeatable and independent is the real revolution. So when the spotlight moved on, the model stayed. And when the systems tried to forget him, his students remembered. They're not waiting for applause. They're building farms, exporting goods, starting brands, Not because anyone told them to, but because someone once showed them it was possible. And maybe that's all it ever takes. If this story challenged how you see power, growth, and value, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of what's rising across the continent. And share this with someone who still thinks development only comes from the outside. Because next time we're taking you somewhere new. Same rules, same pressure, but a whole different kind of answer.